Hey there. So in this game, you got quite a big advantage. Well, you were even winning, but it did not work out. And you mentioned you were discouraged. Well, I mean, this happens in chess, right? And you're right to be discouraged by such a game. But such games will happen, and we have to kind of accept them, but try to minimize the amount of these type of games. So, firstly, there were a few risk factors. Firstly, you lost on time in an equal position, which generally doesn't happen in real chess because we usually play with increment. So that's one thing I would suggest playing with increment all the time because flagging and making quick moves is not really part of real chess, right? So this isn't really even a loss in my book as you lost on time in a game without increment. So this happens. Otherwise, there are important procedures that we have to keep in mind when winning a winning position, and the first step is always consolidation and minimizing counterplay. As if we have a winning position, especially if it's a static advantage as it was here, it doesn't go away automatically, which means if we make sure that the opponent doesn't do anything, our advantage will stay and we will eventually win. And in your annotations, you did take a lot of good conclusions away from this. So we got the Botvinnik English, quite a decent position for white as you exchange the light squared bishops, which is good for white because black is left with this one. White has slightly more space, of course black can do the same thing, but generally white simply has the better bishop and he is a few tempi up in development. So you decide to play on the queen side, which is generally correct. And here a5 and the queen b3. So this is kind of a strange plan that you started here. I guess if you want to play queen b3 you can just play it here, and then if b6 now this makes a bit more sense. Generally white should probably try to advance the pawns all the way to a6, then maybe put the knight on d5, trying to recapture with the c pawn to attack the c7 pawn with the rook. This is kind of the general plan for white in these positions. And black somehow will try to attack on the king side, but that is quite difficult with this bad bishop. So okay, all this happens. You made some progress over here. Bishop g5 is a nice move, and the opponent doesn't understand and plays h6, which is a huge positional mistake. I don't really like that here you have spent already half of your time on every move you were thinking for a few minutes, but generally most moves in chess should be played quite quickly, just a few blunder checks, right, and checking for at least 3 candidate moves in every move, but most of the time we should be making the moves quickly. Okay, here we got a dominating position positionally, but of course it's never so simple to win a game, and we have 11 minutes, which is quite decent, but without increment it's not that much. So of course we have a good knight against bad bishop scenario, so black will have a hard time attacking because he cannot get this bishop into the attack. So basically we have to defend from a rook and a queen. So already white had a decent idea of consolidating the position by maneuvering the queen to g4, which is maybe not the most obvious thing in the world, but we have to understand that any endgame is winning with this knight. Basically any position is winning as long as we don't get checkmated, right? This is the only risk in the position, which is that we might get attacked on the king side, and not even checkmated, but like perpetual check is also an issue, right? So queen d1 is one idea. Even playing like this, sacrificing a pawn, because here if black wins the pawn, here his passed pawn is still not very good, and we can try to occupy the c or f files. This is maybe not terribly convincing, but it is one way to play. But okay, rook c1 makes sense, and okay, rook f7 and a6. So you mentioned you couldn't find a way to exploit the f7 rook, but I don't think you kind of has to. You did mention this line, and here white will win simply by bringing the rook to c7, because black's queen is running out of tempi. Not to mention here white has the ability to set up the perfect kind of fortress with the pawns on light squares, which will not allow black to fight for the dark squares. But okay, a6, this is still possible. And now after this inclusion, now black is definitely lost, because now you also have this target on a7. So now especially you must get rid of counterplay. And the best way to do this is generally to exchange pieces, and mostly the opponent's active pieces, and try to leave only the knight against the bishop if possible, because then white will simply win by picking up this pawn. So we need to exchange rooks and queens, so rook c7 comes to mind. Maybe this rook is a bit better than this one, but still this is a nice exchange. If he tries to double, then we can exchange, and now we only have to defend from two pieces basically. This rook is good enough. g4 is something I like. If f3 and h5, then after, for example, queen c2 stopping queen d2, we can play rook g1, recapture, and we are doing fine. And importantly, this knight controls all the dark squares, so black doesn't really have anything to do. And again, in the long term, black is completely lost because of this knight against this bishop. So all we have to do is not get attacked. But okay, here you took on b6, and yeah, this was the moment to look for more forcing moves, and h4 does come to mind. And the idea is kind of tactical. Generally, we don't want to give up squares like this for the opponent, but this works out objectively because of this. And again, it's not very clear how this works, but after rook takes f4, turns out there's a move f3. And the queen has to get out of this pinning file. So this is not terribly obvious, but it is always worth considering more than one forcing move. But okay, knight b6, this did win a pawn, so now there is absolutely no doubt that white is winning. So now especially we must consolidate, right? And how can we do this? Well, we again have to either block the king side or try to exchange pieces. It's not very clear how that should be done. Maybe one idea is to put the queen again on g4. For example, if we go here, this is, I guess, possible because of queen g4. And here again we're kind of giving up a pawn, but at the end there should be no doubt that white is easily winning here, because all of the things that you did prior to this position. So again, if we just got the queens off the board, then the game is over, right? Because without the queens, black has only this terrible bishop. But okay, queen b8 and queen a7. So the queen is interestingly eyeing up the e3 square, which is good for our defense. And here already you could play queen e3. I'm not sure if you consider this because you recapture it quite quickly, but recapturing does allow a few checks, which is not very ideal. And here queen e3, again we have to remember, if the queens are off the board, then the game is completely over. So we don't care about any of these pawns. All we need is this pawn to win the game, right? And now the queen would have to go away. Now you can recapture, continue exchanging pieces, and one pawn will be enough to win the game, because after all we're basically a piece up. This bishop is not in this game. So fg happens, and this also works, but at this point you are up only one pawn, and the stability of the knight is in question, and black does have a threat here, which I guess is quite serious, because after queen f3 there's queen c2, which happened in the game. So you played a7, and you mentioned you played it too fast. But I don't think you played it too fast, because you had 4 minutes and you used 2 minutes. So we don't have a terribly big amount of time here to make a move. And the move here is not terribly easy, as a6 is hanging, so a7 is the most natural move. So you did well to kind of force yourself to look ahead, because a7 is quite an obvious move. And unfortunately, I guess you just didn't see knight c7. And as you mentioned, you should look for candidates when you're in a critical moment. And I also agree that this is a critical moment, because you felt that here it's important to maybe not lose this pawn, because if you do lose this pawn, then the win might really be in question, right? So here, unfortunately, knight c7 wasn't played, and yeah, the point is that a8 is defended, a7 is defended, and a8 is a queen. So I guess if only you saw this move, the game would be over instantly, right? But you did play a7 in 2 minutes, so I'm not sure what you spent 2 minutes on, because if you only see one move, then you should just play it, right? Yeah, and then think, right? Otherwise, there's no point in checking the move if you're going to play it anyway, right? So this is some food for thought. But yeah, here unfortunately it's a draw, because this is threatened, and playing like this is a bit dangerous. Wouldn't really recommend this. This kind of possible b4, b5, but black has his own counterplay somehow, I guess, b6, h5, and white can't really do anything further, so this is kind of a positional draw, but there's no point in trying this. And yeah, here this is unfortunately perpetual, and the queen goes back to a5. So here you lost on time, but the position is kind of equal because the black queen is tied to a8. So quite an unfortunate game, but I think there are some quite important moments about consolidation and maybe time usage, as you did use quite a lot of time, especially in this kind of stretch of moves starting from a4. You had 27 minutes, and a few moves later, all you did was push the pawn to a5, queen b3, and c5 is easy enough. And here you have 16 minutes, though of course white should play on the queen side, right? So hopefully this was useful, and see you next time.